Now, please welcome to the stage Jeffrey Akman, Dean of the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, and Marcella Flores, Associate Director of Research at amfAR. Here to lead the conversation is the Atlantic's Washington Editor-at-Large, Steve Clemens.
Hey everybody, good morning. You know, I do a lot of national security forums, and I always start out thinking that half the people in the audience are evil. But at this forum, I mean, there's so many good people here today. I just want to, pay tribute to all of you. I mean, you're out here really trying to deal with such an important set of issues. And so let's just get right in. We're going to talk about the science of this, but I've sort of learned that science is more and more political. And so let me just start with you, Jeffrey. I want you to kind of, because PEPFAR and the anniversary of PEPFAR started under George W. Bush, continued under Obama. I just sort of interested, what do you think the strengths and weaknesses in real fast form of Bush, Obama, and Trump on the AIDS battle in the world are?
Well, I think Bush surprised folks in that his efforts on a global level felt very much as a compassionate personal response from his trips to Africa, and I think one can look at the history of his administration and say this was one of the real high points, his efforts around HIV/AIDS. I think that President Obama really turned that focus more towards the national effort. And I served on the President Obama's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, where we did a lot of work on the national AIDS strategy and revised it to its current state, which is due to be revised in 2020. My concern right now about the current administration is there's a real lack of voice coming out of the White House. The Office of National AIDS Policy doesn't exist. PACHA no longer exists. And while there are efforts, the head of the CDC is a longtime HIV/AIDS researcher and clinician, and their efforts in HHS and the State Department, et cetera, there's nothing coming out of the White House. So I'm concerned in that regard about the lack of leadership coming out of the White House on HIV/AIDS. At a time when I think we really need to redouble our efforts. You heard about some of the concerns that have been raised around in the previous panel, but this is not a time for us to be silent around the epidemic.
Marcella, from a science perspective, I know you work every day on this subject. You're one of the, just in the short time, you're obsessed with the cure. I guess, the question comes off so much about leadership. We were discussing this at a dinner last evening. Is it possible to succeed without the folks in the house down the street being supportive? Do you see, are you optimistic about what the chances are of actually getting to a cure, of science proceeding in a healthy manner without the kind of leadership that a lot of folks pined for?
I am absolutely optimistic that we're going to get to a cure. amfAR has committed $100 million toward finding a cure.
Is that a lot or a little?
Well, it's a lot for amfAR. It is, when you look at the global statistics, it's probably, it is certainly much smaller than the NIH. So in that sense, yes, we absolutely do need.
Why are you optimistic? Are you just an optimistic person?
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But in this case, I have science to back me up. So I do live and breathe HIV cure research. And I am optimistic because a lot of strides have been made. So in 2007, we have an example of the first HIV cure. That's the Berlin patient. So Timothy Ray Brown.
Tell us about the Berlin patient.
Timothy Ray Brown is an American living in Berlin at the time. He was a man living with HIV who developed cancer. And to treat his cancer, he received a stem cell transplant, in several rounds of transplant, actually. And he continues to be cured of his HIV. Now, the thing with him that we're still trying to understand is that there are three components to his cure. He received a treatment to remove his immune cells before he received the stem cell transplant, so there's that. He also received a stem cell transplant with HIV-resistant cells. And then thirdly, he had several bouts of graft versus host disease. And any one of those three, or maybe all of those three components, could have led to his cure. And I think it'll be important to repeat that cure. And there has been several attempts, but I think it'll be important to repeat that cure to understand as a proof of concept which of those three components, or whether all three of those components were important for his cure. And while it's certainly true that we're not going to roll out stem cell transplants to 30 million people, it might be true that the first group of people that we cure are people living with HIV who also have cancer.
So, Jeffrey, let me ask you a kind of question, because I know that you sort of look at the broad ecosystem of question. If you're going to be treating this, you can't just go for single shots or just look at HIV. I know that you've sort of looked at, you know, the mental health. You've looked at a broad array of discussions. And what you're talking about is actually, you know, a shot at the science and getting the science right. How do you, when you sort of hear what Marcella just shared, do you think if we were to all of a sudden, abracadabra, come up with a cure, you know, a scientific cure, that gets us where we need to do in eradicating HIV/AIDS?
I think it's much more complicated. I think we need this. We need, look, I, as dean of a medical school, invested heavily in cure research. We also have faculty who are doing vaccine research. And so I'm all in on this. But I think we still have a ways to go on that. And so, but funding the science through the NIH and other foundations is critically important, because the science not only tells us about vaccines and cures, but also tells us, for example, that if we get people into treatment quickly, that's a better prognostic sign. If we get people virally suppressed, then they don't transmit the virus. This is science too. These clinical trials and all of these studies that look at, that give us new information in terms of how we can address the epidemic. So the science works at the basic science level, but also works at the translational, the clinical trial level. And so just going back to the question you first asked me, there are some policies of the current administration that are very problematic as it relates to HIV, as well as public health in general. Efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, efforts to reduce funding at NIH, efforts to ban transgenders into the military, and increasing stigma related to LGBT issues, not engaging communities effectively. These are all problematic policies as it relates to HIV. So our goal is to get people tested, get people into treatment, get people virally suppressed, and get people knowledgeable about their overall health.
So why are we failing? Because, you know, yesterday, and Neil, he's happy to be here, Neil Sony of Mylan said, we are failing in the battle against the HIV epidemic in the United States. And we're succeeding in ways in Africa that we're not succeeding in this country. And you use the words epidemic. And I'm just wondering, epidemic is a scary word, but I'm wondering, has the health system, has the political system begun to be more complacent about what we're dealing with today in ways that scare you?
Well, the beginning of the epidemic, all my friends were passing away.
And do you think we're failing? I mean, do you agree with him? Or
it's hard to use that term. I don't think we're sustaining the successes that we showed and demonstrated through the end of the 90s, through the 2000s, and so I'm concerned too. Are we failing? We're not succeeding in a way that we should. Let's put it that way. It's hard to, we're not successfully accessing, getting information into the communities who really need it. We're not successfully providing programs for whether it's folks who are getting HIV through injecting drug use, or whether there are communities who are underserved medically, or where there are significant rates of health disparities in any number of medical issues. So our efforts are inconsistent. We know that if we can get people linked into treatment and on medication, we can be successful, not only in terms of the person's individual health, but in terms of prevention strategies. But we're inconsistent. And there's some places, San Francisco, that have models that show effectiveness, but it's spotty. It's not just a federal response.
Right.
It's a local, it's a state, it's a community response.
Right.
And so it's variable and spotty. Some places are showing successes and other places are not.
Marcella, you know, this week we had the news from China that somebody took CRISPR, did some, you know, interesting gene editing, decided to go play in the HIV/AIDS space, and apparently produced twin embryos that did not have
One of
that, you know, I'm sorry?
one of the twins didn't.
Or one of the, okay, so there you go. Is that good?
No. No. It was very premature. We, as a society and as scientists, are not ready to put CRISPR in people. Gene therapy, I think, has a lot of, I'm very excited about gene therapy. I think it can be a way of curing people. I can talk more about that later, but in this particular case, CRISPR was certainly not ready for this, not ready to go into people, not ready to go into a baby who had no choice in it. But also, there's still so much unknown. Even just a year ago, maybe less than a year ago, a study came out that was done in mice that showed that mice who were edited with CRISPR actually had, the cells that were edited had a predisposition for mutations in this gene called P53, which is a known oncogene, and P53 regulates the cell cycle. A lot of cancers have mutations in P53. So, you know, we still don't know if we're going to edit a gene and it leads to cancer. These are all questions that should have been asked.
So you're way ahead of most of us, and there's some really smart people in the audience, but not all of them. And as you know, you can help share with us as you sit on the edge of what science is revealing and what you see coming down the pike that we may not as lay people understand. Just give us a glimpse at what you think are the most promising next step therapies that we may not be aware of, but you think are highly promising in the HIV/AIDS area.
Okay. In keeping with gene therapy, what we have done so far is take cells out of people, edit them in a lab, and we edit them by removing CCR5, which is a co-receptor, a receptor that HIV needs to enter the cells, so in essence making these cells resistant to HIV. So we'll take them out of the person, edit them in a petri dish, and put them back in the person with the intention of making that person resistant to HIV so that his own or her own HIV-infected cells have nowhere to go, basically. They hit a wall because they cannot enter these resistant cells. We've done that, and you know, there's challenges to be done there, but that's one approach. Another approach, such as CRISPR, and there's other molecular scissors, which is basically what CRISPR is. These molecular scissors will go into an HIV-infected cell and quite literally clip out the HIV DNA and then sew the DNA back together, and making that cell, which was once HIV-infected, now non-infected. So that's, it's a really powerful technique, and one, again, that is not ready to go into humans, but that we certainly need to work on. And in fact, I'm really excited about a monkey study that we just funded, because it aims to do this, it aims to take away the step of doing the editing in a petri dish. Rather, it aims to edit the cells directly into the animal. So I think that is one way, if we're successful, where gene therapy can be rolled out to the greater public.
When you look at Japan, China, Korea, India, the U.S., you know, those that have invested heavily in science, who's doing the best science? Who's ahead? I mean, that's a dimension, right? We're talking as if this is a U.S. case, but actually it's a global case, and you've got global AIDS research. I know a lot going on in India, a lot going on in Korea. Are there others out there that are beating, you know,
I think in the field of cure research, again, which is my expertise, the very first description of a different type of cure, which is not a cure to eradicate the virus from the body, but it's rather a cure to teach the body how to control the virus. That was done in France, the Visconti cohort. And this is a cohort of individuals who started ART, antiretroviral therapy, very early. And then the therapy was removed, and they spontaneously controlled their virus. I think that's a laudable goal, to induce this type of post-treatment control. That was led by France. I think that's really important. Now the US has identified over 100 people that are post-treatment controllers, and the goal is to try to understand how they do control, and try to design an intervention that we can roll out to 37 million people and have them control as well.
Jeffrey, I want to go to the audience in a moment, but I want to ask you kind of a cosmic question. So given all this science, you know, sort of feel like going on, and you're the dean of one of the most prestigious medical schools in the country, you think in terms of ecosystems, and what can be done. I'm sort of interested as whether, you know, or not someone in your role can see where there are unhelpful silos, where there are blind spots in the way we're approaching this, that you can share with us of things that if you were to be given, you know, just enormous power to change the way that we're thinking about approaching this epidemic, what would be the things that you would do or change? Or are we just doing so well that, you know, we'll just be here 5 years from now and say, "Way, we did it"?
Well, I grew up in this epidemic as an activist in the community, as well as a clinician and a teacher, and so I think about these kinds of things a lot. There are opportunities for increased innovation, enhanced innovation, and a lot of it is through partnerships. So when I look at the silos that exist, so I look at GW as a medical school and some of the partnerships that we've developed and some of the efforts that we're making. So for example, we've got a partnership with the National Alliance of State Territorial AIDS Directors. Our medical students,
They're here today. You're going to be nice to them or mean?
I'm going to be very nice to them.
Okay, good.
We want all of our students and physicians to grow up to be part of the generation of physicians that cure HIV/AIDS, that eradicate HIV/AIDS. And we've developed very innovative programs in our school where we bring our students together with policymakers from around the United States and the country and from states, and they develop policies that address HIV testing, and getting people into treatment, et cetera. We partnered with the Department of Health in the District of Columbia. We've done partnerships in the community to both engage our students and get them very sort of HIV/AIDS literate, but also to partner in the community. So we're breaking down silos. But one of the things that we did at GW is we rewrote our mission statement to include eliminating health disparities as part of our mission. And we're never going to get to HIV/AIDS eradication until we actively and very intentively deal with health disparities in our community. And it's not just HIV, obviously, it's cancer, it's everything. And this is across the country. And until we really sort of grab this and say, we have got serious barriers to care in any number of ways, and serious social problems that are interfering with our patients' ability to get the care that they need and stay in treatment, we're never going to address this issue successfully. So we've got the science, but if you're in my place and looking, you're having to deal with the social issues, the public health issues, not just the science, the policy issues. And that's where White House leadership is so crucial, because if you're stigmatizing groups and you're driving them underground, I mean, look at the trans community. You've got a president who is trying to ban the trans folks from getting into military. You think that's not going to have an effect on other aspects of trans life and trans health if you're driving people underground? I mean, and we've got a serious problem. There's HIV in the trans community. So all of this is around leadership, and academic medical centers and medical schools are playing a very important role in the epidemic, partnering with amfAR, partnering with communities, partnering with states and local jurisdictions, and obviously also federal agencies.
You know, getting back to some, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Getting back to something you were saying about getting people in treatment, that's important for a lot of reasons. And in my case, it's important because it might be that people who are treated earlier versus people who are treated later might be better candidates for a cure. And I think that the sooner you know your status and sooner you get in treatment and stay in treatment, you know, the better your chances are potentially of being cured later on.
There are very few panels I wish that went on for an hour, because I want to talk about stigma. I learned last night, which is something I just didn't know, is that in the LGBT population, only 4% of people are on PrEP, for instance, and that's highly a circle of privilege. I mean, there are so many issues you've opened up, and I really appreciate it. But let me go to the audience real quick. Bill Cunningham, right here in the front. I don't really know Bill. I just saw him when he came in. Hey, Bill. Good morning.
It's a tough question for you. All right, I just want to warn you. D.C. has the highest, or had the highest rate of HIV infection of any city in the country. It also has the highest rate of maternal mortality for black women, okay? There's no hospital. The reason is because there's no hospital in Ward 7 and Ward 8. Now, GW is in negotiations with the city, as I understand it, to put a hospital at St. E's. But you guys seem to have some conditionality that would speak in a way that's contrary to what you just said. about reaching out to the community. Now, I'm on the faculty at Georgetown. I'm encouraging Georgetown to take your place in Southeast Washington, D.C. I'm also from...
I like how he injects competition.
Bill, let me,
okay, thanks, Bill. So let's
it.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the
you.
question.
Yeah.
And you're right, GW Hospital is in negotiations with the city in terms of building a new hospital.
We're going to make news here?
No.
Oh.
But where you're wrong is that it can't just be about the hospital. It has to be about a lot more than building a box on St. E's campus, because infant mortality is not going to be addressed just by having high-level OBGYNs and maternal fetal medicine docs in that box. We're going to have to really have primary care for women and prenatal care at a level that does not exist. So it has to be a community and outpatient response tied into the hospital. And the other piece that we're bringing to this partnership with the city is workforce development in Ward 7 and 8. And that is a huge commitment of mine as a dean of a medical school.
Any quick question on science? Yes, you're right here. Yeah, and let's bring you a microphone here. I'm going to direct this to Marcella.
Well, the question is for Dr. Flores. My question is, can you elaborate on the use of CRISPR in gene therapy and the implications of having used it prematurely was it implicated in the news?
Right.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, CRISPR is a molecular scissor. It goes in and it cuts out HIV from our DNA. Some of the unintended consequences of CRISPR is that it also cuts out other genes that we might need. Also, it could potentially be more active in cells that have a problem in this oncogene, this P53. The consequences of doing it prematurely, as has been done potentially, I haven't seen the actual data. We don't know what they might be, and we're not ready to get there yet. We need a lot more animal work. We need to understand how these off-target effects are going to affect a living, breathing animal first. It was not ready to go into.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about the impact of this result in China?
Ethically, it's a 10.
It's a 10.
Ethically, yeah. I don't think we're ready for that as a society, as scientists, as people, as a mother. You know?
So that's a tweetable moment. Marcella Flores, amfAR. Big round. Thank you so much. Marcella Flores of amfAR, Jeffrey Akman, Dean of the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thanks so much,
Thank you very much.